It's my pleasure to speak to Prime Minister Mottley of Barbados. And let me start with your speech yesterday, Prime Minister. You talked about the climate crisis and the existential crisis facing all of us, whether we're from the islands, whether from Africa. And you feel that there's not a great sense of urgency, the one that we need to actually get some action, finally.
Well, I think people are saying that it's urgent, but the actions aren't matching the words. And there's a good dancehall song that tells you action, not a bag of words. And that's really what the world needs now. The regrettable thing is that for some, they do have time because they're not necessarily on the front line. And they may not therefore appreciate the need for urgency or the need for ambition. Secondly, I think we've reached a stage in the whole process where we have to get granular. We have to get laser-like, because the continued broad commitments on an annual basis or periodically are simply not going to cut it. If we can't ensure that countries or companies have access to the capital that they need to do the adjustments that they need, it will not happen. If we can't make sure that companies and countries have access to the goods and the plant and equipment that they need to make the transition, it will not happen. So we need now to see a different approach that is not just about ambition. Ambition is just that. It's not action. It may start with the same A and end with the same N, but there's a lot of difference between the two words in the middle.
That is absolutely true. Because we have heard a lot of commitments over the years. It's all well-meaning, but it does not follow through with the action. So why is it important for you to get granular, as you say?
Because if not, things won't happen. Look, my country, and I've said it last year, I say it again this year, because nothing has changed. We have a serious problem with a just transition that does not allow for access to battery and battery storage. And then there are real issues then as to cost. Because if something is scarce, it means that the price is going to be high. If the price is high, it means that the rate of return is not going to be what you need it to be, which means that your uptake is not going to be there. So we need to be able to ensure that first and foremost, that we can see what is commercially viable with respect to battery storage. We need to make sure and see what capacity we have for countries to be able to plan onshore and offshore wind. We need to be able to see where is the production capacity for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. And we also need to be able, and it's a difficult one particularly for populations where people hitherto have always assumed, and the badges of honor that our popular culture put on us is cars.
Right.
So you see all the wealthy people, and one man can only drive a car at one time, one car at a time, but they have 20 and 30 and 40 cars.
Because it's a status symbol.
That's the status symbol, that's the badge of honor. So what do you expect other people to want to aspire to? And therefore the kind of cultural change that needs to go along with the granular planning for access to finance and access to plant and equipment and goods to facilitate trade and production is just not there. So not that it can't be there, but it just means that the course correction is not just for the financial architecture. The course correction is for personal behavior. The course correction is for the messaging and the values that we uphold as a global community. And we need to start perhaps with some of the popular cultural icons who perhaps need to help us shape what a new reality, and I think the Secretary General said it well. The climate crisis is not just about saving the planet, it is about changing how we live on the planet. And if there is not that concomitant adjustment in behavior, I'm not sure that we will all get there safely.
We're here at, okay, feel free to clap. I don't want to stop you from doing this. We're here at Unstoppable Africa, and you have made the connection between the African diaspora and continental Africans a centerpiece of your work, and building those connections and linkages between the Caribbean and the African continent. How do you see this, how these two parts of the world come together?
Look, this is a historic necessity, and I've said so over and over. But the reality is that we have been manipulated and played for 4 centuries. And therefore, even the acknowledgement that it must happen will not make it happen overnight. So what we're trying to do is to create the architecture that will facilitate it. The Africa Exim Bank has just opened its first regional office outside of Africa in Barbados 2 months ago. A year ago when we met, that was not a reality. Prior to that, we have Republic Bank, which is predominantly owned by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in Ghana with over 40 branches. I start with the financial institutions because more often than not, when you're trying to create something new, people need familiar faces. And people need familiar faces that can help them bridge that gap that is necessary for trust to flourish. So I think that we're getting there. I just saw Equity Bank, I just saw Access Bank came down at the same time. We need some African banks in the Caribbean to complement the indigenous banks and the Canadian banks that have been there for a century. And similarly, we need to see the Caribbean banks expanding in Africa too, so it gives that same sense of comfort to Caribbean investors in Africa, as you will have for African investors in the region. Then we need to master transport. I see the director of the International Trade Center here, who is a Jamaican and a Barbadian. And we claim her because she lives there sometimes too. But the point is this, that unless we master the logistics of trade with respect to air transport and sea transport, you're not going to be able to move goods, you're not going to be able to move people easily. And one of the things that we can't continue to do is to believe that we can master it purely by hope. Hope is not a strategy, okay? As much as we want to wish for it. And it therefore means that we have to make some critical decisions to develop the market. There is no more perfect person than you, my brother, to help develop that market on all sides, not just on both sides of the Atlantic, but in the diaspora here in the United States of America, in Canada, in the Europe and UK. Why? Because the first thing that an airline will ask is, do we have the load factor to justify the continued flights? We've agreed that we probably will have to start with some charters, but the truth is, even for a charter, if you're an artist, I got to play your music for 3-4 months, almost every day, before I can expect a full audience in the concert.
Right.
Similarly, if we expect traffic to move between Africa and the Caribbean, we need to be able to be boosting awareness and knowledge so that you get aspiration and ambition, and then, like what I want in the climate, then you get action. So I think that is beginning to happen. The Africa Trade and Investment Forum the inaugural one that we had in Barbados last August, will be complemented this year by the second one in Guyana, because this is not going to be a one-off event. And I want to thank Professor Arama, because truly he has led this effort with great, great courage and great determination to ensure that there is a bridge between Africa and the Caribbean. So that second forum will help. But amplification, that's what you do. My PS looked at you and hugged you. Why? Oh, what did she tell you? We watch you in Barbados every week. Because people watch you all over.
Right.
So when you start to be able to promote for both sides of the Atlantic that desire, then it's easy for the planes to come. The next thing is the trade. And the trade is critical because both of us were fashioned and structured to look north for trade.
Right.
We need to look east and west respectively. And the key point is in fish. Africa imports some to $4.5 billion a year in fish, but only 1% comes from the Caribbean, which is predominantly islands. And those who are not islands have rivers and lakes and an abundance of water, which means that there's an abundance of both ocean fish and freshwater fish. Now, why aren't we seeing the investments to be able to scale up and to be able to export directly, rather than sending to the North Atlantic countries for them to send back with an additional margin and hence an additional increase in cost of living for the persons who are buying stuff? I use the example of cola tonic. We had a prime minister, our father of independence, loved cola tonic. But where does the cola come from? The people who make the cola tonic import the syrup from the UK rather than get in Ghana to be able to do the additional value added. And one of the things that happened in July and in June, we had the summit in Paris on a new global financial pact. We had the EU CELAC meeting, which brought together 60 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean. And we are now seeing a commitment to stop 4 centuries of extractive industry practices in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, because there is a recognition that it is unsustainable to continue on that path. Now the question is, how much value added will we be given space to do? Now I say that deliberately because I come from a country where Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black congresswoman in this country,
right.
And she was a Barbadian, and she said, if you don't have a chair at the table, you bring your own folding chair. And I therefore say that it is not a question of what others allow us to do, but it is a question of what we plan and design for ourselves. And I'm not sure that the strategic work is being done at a sufficient level to ensure that what are those 3 or 4 right opportunities for trade in goods? How do we, for example, in terms of services, look at the fact that with cruise tourism, Africa has one of the lowest penetration rates within cruise, and how can we, instead of only looking at the United Kingdom or Europe to bring tourists for home porting, for Southern Caribbean cruises, that we should be bringing them across rather than depending on somebody giving a transit visa.
Right.
So there are a number of things, but I believe that we are building the architecture, and so long as we can get somebody coming to work every day, and hence the presence of Africa Exim Bank is good, I'm hoping that there will be other institutions on both sides of the Atlantic that can help make this work.
All right.
And that we have you as an ally.
You have me as an ally. I'm heading to Barbados. The Prime Minister sent the invitation. I hope you can all come with me. It's happening. It's happening. See, we have 2 or 3 people who are coming, Prime Minister. By the end of the day, everybody will be coming to Barbados. What is your advice for young people who want to get into leadership and want to have impact in their countries?
Be true to themselves first and foremost, because people will know when there is not sincerity or authenticity. Secondly, recognize that there's some rules that we learned as children that will do you well in terms of values-based action. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Once you start seeing people, hearing people, and feeling people, and treating them as you would want to be treated, that becomes the first platform for the building of trust and the expression of empathy. Secondly, we need to recognize that not everybody is given the same talent, and therefore the understanding and the space that's necessary to be able to bring along others, because the other thing that we learn is that without solidarity, without togetherness, we're not going to get very far. So I just want to reinforce in them, develop the habit of working with people who most need the help and who without which there would be no progress for them. But don't look for the rewards, because it isn't about you. Do the job that you have and not the one that you want.
All right. The Prime Minister has got to run, but I got to ask you this. You become extremely popular in the speaking circuit. You are very sought after in every one of these forums. Are they listening to your message, or are they tokenizing you? Because, hey, she will come in and she'll say these important things, speak passionately, make us uncomfortable for a few minutes, and then we can go back to doing whatever we do.
I hope I'm not only making you uncomfortable, I hope I'm inspiring you to dream. Because if you dare to dream, then I'm going to ask you to be determined to do. And what we've done is to be persistent to make sure that we can measure progress in terms of people's capacity to be determined to do. Last year, this time, the World Bank was not sure there was a climate crisis. This year, the World Bank has announced that there are debt pause clauses to be able to deal with the climate crisis. I would say that's progress. Are we at the mission accomplished level? No, we're not. Because we need to make sure that those debt clauses are not used only for future instruments, but that there is a consensual variation on existing instruments. If not, when countries are hit by a crisis, they will not be able to benefit from that for another 10, 15 years. Last year, there was still doubt about what the level of reforms would be in the international financial architecture. Now we have the evolution world roadmap, and we have people even recognizing that the evolution roadmap may be still modest, but nevertheless, what it has done has led to an increase in the capital of the World Bank. We need to see 3 times the amount that we're lending, but we've seen at least some start. Similarly, there is now a recognition that the issue of surcharges at the IMF is something that will need to be addressed. Surcharges in a high interest rate environment simply comes across as punitive. Similarly, when we started this 2 years ago, there was no instrument at the IMF to deal with providing low-cost capital and long moratoria. IMF never gave 20-year loans in its history. IMF is now under the Resilience and Sustainability Trust that is designed to deal with middle-income countries that are vulnerable, low-income countries that are vulnerable, all countries that are vulnerable. But what it does is give us a 10.5-year moratorium and as well as lower interest rates. Those things were unheard of when I became Prime Minister 5 years ago, not because of anything other than the fact that not Barbados alone, but the majority of us who are fighting together and bringing the message together are singing from the same hymn sheet, and we are therefore seeing countries respond. Solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. That is what Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America and Asia and the Pacific are doing across the world, and developing countries are coming into their own to be able to present that. So we are seeing progress, but do we need to see quicker progress? Yes, we do.